special call meeting of the Montgomery Board of Education is now reconvened. There is no action from the executive committee session. We will now move to item number 5, receiver's information.
Yes, I'd like to bring Leapfrog forward. Leapfrog is a consulting firm that's going to give us information about workflow processes and operations in our school district that I think the board will find interesting because it talks about ways that we can save money for the district.
Hello, I'm Chastity White. I'm the lead consultant with Leapfrog. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
That's better.
Good, thank you. My name is Chastity White. I'm a lead consultant with Leapfrog, and we wanted to present our initial findings from our assessments that we performed last week with the finance department. We want to first of all explain our process and how we perform the detailed assessment like we did with your finance department. First of all, we had 4 assessors, and we spent 2 days in the finance department. We spent that time interviewing employees in the finance department. We observed work as it was appropriate and as it was being done, if they were performing work. And we reviewed their process inputs and outputs, so what was being brought into the department to be processed and what was leaving the department. We then asked for multiple data sets and documents from the department. The department was very cordial to give us whatever we were asking for, so that made it very easy to analyze the data and get as much information to be able to pull the information. We then also established a peer group. We look at other school systems that are similar to your size and give something so we can give you some analysis on how you're performing in regards to others. And then we analyze all the data, and we use Lean Six Sigma tools. And what we're looking for is process waste and variation. Variation meaning that you do things differently and not a standard approach. So, in an overview, our findings are that there are processes that are being performed that are extremely manual. They're cumbersome, labor intensive. In this time with technology performing what it does for us, we found that there's some opportunity within how things are being accomplished. When looking at the organizational structure, how the department is organized, we were able to find that the design that is currently in place creates some siloing and work redundancy and excessive paper, as I've mentioned already. So that makes, from a lean perspective, those processes ineffective and inefficient for becoming those value added for your organization. We also didn't find data-driven type analysis or performance. So we look at, from a lean perspective, we look at, are you looking at key performance indicators and generating results that you can measure your success and where you need to improve? So with that, we were able to identify some significant opportunities. And with that, we looked at cost savings as well as labor. And I'm going to go through each of these findings today, but basically we looked at your purchasing and your AP process and found some opportunities for some additional revenues or for some cost savings that you could benefit from. And those numbers at the bottom tells you the minimum and maximum that we think that those opportunities will allow for you. Again, I'm going to go through those details through the rest of the slides. The next is our labor saving opportunities. Again, these are with the recommendations that we're making. We think that you can improve some of the time spent in your processes, and those savings are between 78 and 11,000 hours in some of that processing. So pretty significant. So I'm going to walk through the details of the purchasing and the AP process improvements that we saw. The first slide is we actually try to map out as many processes as we can. So we understand, again, how that work is flowing, what's happening in the department. And this outline here is the process flow of your purchasing and AP for funds that aren't for teachers, maintenance, or CMP. Because you have 4 processes, and I'm going to speak to that in just a second a little bit more. But basically, we found that there's 20 steps in this current process. And many of those are performed with paper flowing through this, as well as many labor hours are included. So we're going to, next slide, will give you an idea when we say the paper usage. I think this is a good illustration for you. We the purchasing manager provided us with PO numbers, and there was about 30,342 purchase orders issued in the year, and there was 8,824 checks that were issued. That's and then because the purchase order format is 6 sheets to process the purchase order, there was 190,576 sheets of paper that's annually being produced for that process. And when we look at the cost of that paper, we found that you have about 14.5 to 18.8 thousand pieces of paper, dollars that you could save by eliminating that paper.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
So, and then if you, and just an idea about what that paper looks like, it's about 33 linear feet if you stacked it from end to end, or 2 football fields high if you laid them flat. So that's a lot of paper that then stays here. It's got to be processed and stored. So, when we look at the opportunity in the process, we can identify that there are 10 steps that could be eliminated by implementing technology that you have access to. I've identified those steps that are eliminated. There's actually a module within the system that you're using today. Also the paper would go away, and you have the proper approval still, you have proper workflow that exists within the system. Another opportunity that we identified for your cost savings and revenue generating opportunities is a purchasing card system. Many school systems across the state have implemented this. Basically, it's an opportunity for you to set up an account with a vendor such as Regions or American Express provide these services, and you can pay your invoices, those large purchases, either by the like a virtual card where they're just entering the account information, or an actual card that you give to maybe your maintenance or your teachers, those who are purchasing things on a frequent basis, very low dollar. It also gives you opportunities to set up the system so that it manages what type of purchases, what type of dollar systems. There's lots of controls in that system. It also gives the vendors the access to their funds much faster. And then it also gives you some revenue, and that's the big piece that I want to talk about. And we show some of the vendors here that were accepted. It's already been negotiated, but Jefferson County Board of Education has received $494,000 in cash rebates from this program. It's about a 1.12% on certain purchases that you could do, and we estimate that Montgomery can have 224 to 449 in rebates when we looked at your PO expenditures, about 30 to 60%. It's a range according to what kind of vendors you would set up, and again, if you put the virtual and or both the actual cards in place.
And who has that card? Where does that card just stays in the finance department?
Well, yeah, there's 2 phases of this. The virtual card is just a finance department
Okay.
card, and you use it to apply when you're paying the bills, just like you normally, instead of issuing a check, you use the card. And if it's the actual card, again, teachers, maintenance folks, and again, it has controls, but those are things that you can make the decision if you go both phases or just one phase. So,
The controls are my biggest concern. Is who has it and where does it stay?
yes, that's understandable. And again, the system is set up so that you can dictate even what vendors it can use that. So it goes beyond certain vendors, and also dollar amounts can be set. They set this up for the controls to be sure they're in place. So.
Is that annual savings you're talking about?
Yes, sir. Or annual rebates, actually. Rebates. Mm-hmm. Okay. The other opportunities we saw, I mentioned a second ago, is that there are 4 processes. And again, what we look at is standardizing your processes so people know how information is flowing and how details are flowing. We found 4 different methods by which purchasing is occurring. A different one for maintenance, a different one for teachers, a different one for CMP, and a different one for federal programs. And our experience is that if you merge those, you do the automated processes we've talked about, you eliminate the need for 4 separate ways of handling things. Instead, they're all merged into one, and it can all be done electronically. Additionally, there's an opportunity for improved leverage buying. We found that, our example here, Huntsville City Schools, They were purchasing supplies, individually, no negotiation taking place because they weren't tracking. And your department is pretty overwhelmed with a lot of paper, as we've said, so their time is not spent as much looking at where they're purchasing, what vendors, what's the volume. So we're missing some volume discounts by not doing that. And so we've estimated $100,000 to $200,000 of savings just by leveraging those purchases in your maintenance department that you're already going to purchase anyway. But maybe you can reduce that and get some savings there. Also, you have an internal mail, which we're calling the Pony here, the Pony Express. And you're processing every day those mail runs. And again, that's because of a lot of paper needs to flow on a regular basis and to be efficient to get it where it needs to go so you're not waiting. And if you make some of these processes again electronic and automated, then that you can probably reduce that service by at least 50%. And so the savings there are just the operational cost of that service being run on a daily basis. We also found that there was some compliance or segregation of duties potentially. Sometimes the process steps don't make the most sense necessarily. You're receiving goods before you issue a purchase order. That creates some opportunities in making sure that you're compliant with the laws. Also, the opportunity to look at how your purchases are occurring. What's the large dollars that have occurred and by the same vendors. And again, we estimated that if some of the automation, you could save anywhere from 4,500 to 6,700 hours that are being taken in these processes today. The next thing I want to talk about is CMP and a revenue generator. Some people might say, well, why are we talking about CMP? This is about finance. But we also take the time to see if you're optimizing all your revenue opportunities. And in CMP, we looked at your breakfast program because your breakfast program came to mind when we saw the high percent of free and reduced schools that you have. You have a significant number of free and reduced. And there is a new program that is available that we wanted to explore. So we looked at your participation in those schools. And we found that only 41.06 is your average of your breakfast participation. And that 42.5 of those students qualify for free reduced lunch. So with that number, we knew that there was an opportunity to look at what we call BIC, a breakfast and classroom program that is currently available. Basically, you may say, I don't know what BIC is, so tell me about that a little bit. So we did want to talk about that, although it's a CMP program. It is an approach where the classroom, the breakfast is available in the classroom. It's brought to the classroom for students. It is served after the bell rings. It is the teacher may be taking roll or collecting homework or those kinds of things while this is going on. And it's about 10 minutes and it's over. So it's something that's not too much of a disruption, but it does take place so that you're providing breakfast to more of your students. The reason why this is the opportunity is because it also increases your academic achievement. We'll talk about that in revenues. Below are some of the results that we've seen at Huntsville. Breakfast participation goes up to 76%. So you've got more children getting that breakfast. We also all probably know and understand that eating breakfast is going to make you more alert and more able to function and to learn more. So they've also seen an increase of 15% over other school increases in their STAR math scores and 20% in their STAR reading scores.
Is that because of the breakfast or maybe different techniques used or methodologies for teaching?
Well, again, this is Huntsville.
Is that the breakfast?
This is, I'm sorry.
In order to say this, and what I'm looking at, you say it increases academic achievement and revenue. Well, I don't know. Did you do a study before you start the breakfast, then did one after you got the breakfast in order to determine whether the breakfast had an impact on that learning?
Yes, sir. These are improvements over their test scores that they did that had before and after. So this isn't a change in their test scores. So
the only variable that changed was breakfast.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. They held that consistent so they could review that, and this is from their results. This isn't our results. This is their results. And again, they're able to increase the revenue by 74%, and that's what I want to talk about in particular because that's an opportunity for you guys to, again, establish because of your high free and reduced, you have a huge opportunity. When we looked at your increase, your participation going up to 75%, and the reason why we say 75% is because, again, it's available to all students, it's easily accessible to them, to your participation increases. And with that percent increase, you've got an increase of individuals, and that equates to the money that you get back from the reimbursement from the federal, which is $1.85 for that reimbursement from those free students. And so that's an annual increase of your revenues of $1.7 million. So that's just revenue coming in that you don't have right now. And then with that, of course, it takes cost to operate it. I understand that. So we took that into account. And that number, the 221 to 309, is after you take out your operational costs, which would be about 80% is what we're factoring. So that's the rest of the money you can apply to your indirect costs within the school system or back to your general fund. Another process we looked at is your payroll process. Again, we outlined the steps, so we understood the workflow. And we, in this, I identified there, you see some hours and some numbers. Those hours are how long it's taking to do some of those very manual processes. Your service reports, they go out to the schools, and so they have to fill in the amount of time that each person has either been on leave or used other kind of hours, or your hourly people, capturing people who don't work all the time, so they get paid only on occasion, so they capture that. So it's a very manual process. The payroll department told us it took them 32 hours a month to prepare those. So that's just preparing that paper to send out before the process begins. That's annually 384. Again, it goes out through your mail service, and then when it comes back to payroll, they have to input all that. So that's a manual input that's happening today. And so that's anywhere from according to the month and according to the changes and things that have to be entered. There's about 3,000 to 4,300 hours of just data input that's happening today.
With the school system that you've worked with, or do any of them require direct deposit? Because I know my company requires direct deposit.
And actually, you do have a mandatory direct deposit.
We got that. So we are doing that. You're saying all these paper checks.
No, I'm not talking about paper checks. I'm talking about service reports. I'm talking about pay.
Gotcha. Okay.
Generate
Not on the same
time.
page.
Yes.
It's a paper cost. That's what.
It said, well, in that paper is not your checks. It's actually large paper, I call green bar paper, computer paper that has to be printed out and then written on at your school level by individuals to report your hours. I'm sure people in the secretaries in the schools know all about what I'm talking about. So, anyway, so again, it comes to the payroll department for them to input. Additionally, now to your point and to your question, you guys are still printing paper advices. So your paper pay statements at the end, although you're not printing checks, you are printing paper statements. And so that's the cost down here. This 3,384 is how much paper that is being generated. That's something that we believe you could do away with pretty immediately. There's a module within NextGen, so people can electronically see their paycheck stubs. So you're still generating paper there that's unnecessary with the direct deposits that you already have in place.
So we have NextGen now. That's what we are.
Yes, that is
already
what
have that.
yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And again, I identified the labor hours that are there. Some of it could be reduced by your system going more automatic, as well as just generating some less paper that people have to take care of and generate for everybody. So, okay. Other opportunities that we saw was you've also invested in a program called SubFinder. And I'm sure some people are familiar with the call out to get their substitute to take their place. However, it's not mandatory. It's not required that everybody use it. If you use it, then you're generating information that can be saved and presented through your payroll data. It does integrate over. It does integrate into NextGen.
It does not?
It does.
Oh, okay, great.
So if you require that, then you have the data there. Because it's not required, your payroll department says we can't use it, which is understandable. So that's one thing we think could be easily improved by just requiring.
Why wouldn't we? What would be a reason why we wouldn't require it?
Well,
Do we know?
We bought the system, and we're gonna talk this a little bit at the end.
Okay.
Because I think what you're gonna find, and she mentioned it to begin with, we have silos in this district. And so a lot of that is when you integrate information between payrolls and teachers and hours, and we can talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
Some people don't really understand the benefit of a system when you're not talking to one another about why you're doing what you're doing. So they may understand it other than a call-out system, and that's probably what they're thinking, because it also calls substitutes for you. So they're strictly using it as an opportunity to call my sub, and that's it. So if they think I just call my sub myself, then I don't need to use the system. That's likely the reason. We also recommend that you evaluate the purchase of a district-wide electronic timekeeping system. We found that many of your schools have an electronic timekeeping system that's individual to them. It's collecting some data, but they still have to put on the paper for it to come to payroll. So we're not even taking advantage of that technology that you have. So if you use an a district-wide electronic system, it would be utilized in all the schools and all the departments, and that data would flow over into your system. And NextGen actually integrates with many electronic timekeeping systems. So that would save a lot of those steps in that process, save a lot of that paper by implementing a district-wide electronic system. Also, we found an interesting thing that you have some functions that are occurring in payroll. They're usually HR duties, and the reason why those are that way is because it allows for a separation of duties so that errors can be detected and no inappropriate activities occurring where someone couldn't enter a phantom employee and get paid and that sort of thing. Again, not suggesting at all that you have that, but that's why those systems exist that way, that usually data is entered by HR, so that they're establishing the folks, and then payroll is actually making sure that they're paid accurately according to that data. So a little bit of issue there, a potential issue. Also, they reported a lot of interruptions to their work. Within a couple of days, they did an interruptions log for us, and we found 4 hours of unscheduled, unproductive work that they were having to be interrupted in their workflow to do. So that's something that could be explored to improve processes. Those are usually things when you find variation in the process. Things aren't standard, so people don't know where to go or how to get it done more effectively. Other opportunities. Although we found some documentation, and I'm going to actually express our thoughts on that in a minute about sometimes we found it to be very good, and we felt that they were doing a great job of documenting some things. There was no overall document processes. There was your key processes that we would think that you would want to make sure that everybody understands how they're accomplished, as well as from a lean perspective. Process management requires for you to know how things are going to be done. You also have some people that are retiring and plan to retire. So if you don't capture these, you're going to lose some opportunity. Also, NextGen, we talked about NextGen again already, but there's also a module called position control. And NextGen, you already have access to it. You just have to turn it on for yourself. It is a process by which you will control your staffing, as well as it's a budgeting tool. And it keeps control in that staffing process. So you're looking at reducing the potential to overstaff, because it's staffing to a budget. It's also eliminating extra personnel expenditures that you may not have scheduled in your budget. And it also speeds up that process because you already have a standard by which you process your budget every year. And it's from your systems, from your payroll system. We also found that some of the duties that were performed by personnel in the finance department were outside of that person's primary area, that they were AP functions or payroll functions or HR functions, that if they were just consolidated back to those primary areas, you'd have some efficiencies in the work because these people are already processing, the same kind of information. Federal programs have a lot of folks doing AP tasks, which again, if we automate the processes we talked about, that would be not needed either. The approvals could be done electronically. So employee benefits personnel was performing some HR and payroll tasks, such as entering deductions. And payroll's already entering other deductions, so they could enter those deductions when they're entering the other deductions. We also look at best practices and see if we see evidence. And not to say that we got into detail. We get the information that's presented. So we got no evidence that we saw some of the things that are best practices in your budgeting process, such as position control. There's many other things that could be implemented to speed up your process. Fixed assets, we understand it's handled by another department, so we saw no correlation to the finance department on that. Risk and liability, talked a little bit about liability and risk, but there are more aspects of that. We didn't see any evidence of those. And optimizing your financial resources, again, giving you the opportunity with CMP would be those types of things. Again, as I mentioned, we did see some good things, so we don't want to go without saying that, again, not only was the personnel very helpful in providing information, we saw them doing some really good things that we want to bring note to. They're utilizing retired personnel as appropriate and as available, which means that they've got some people who retired but had some good knowledge that they could still utilize in the department, and they avoid having the benefit cost that personnel would cost if they brought in a new employee. So we felt that was to be commended. Also, they do have the mandatory direct deposit, so yes. And again, we are printing the paper advices, but they are required, so there's no prints of checks, so that's good. We also explored the resources that are available to the public and to your employees, and found that the payroll website had lots of good information. I'll be honest, I was surprised by the interruptions when I saw that they had some really good things standardized so that people could see that information. I thought that was commendable. We also found that the purchasing supervisor had created a user manual for district personnel. So that's definitely a step in the right direction toward documenting your processes and give people information so you're breaking down those silos of information. The local school accounting team, they went over their training that they're providing to the bookkeepers and the principals, and we felt that was very commendable because they're definitely working toward keeping them on track and giving them the information that they need. That's a very critical function. And then we've learned that your board policy is being revised, and we see that as a great opportunity so that you can improve some of your policies and procedures to get closer to a more efficient workplace. The next steps that we take, just so you know what we do, is that we have a plan of evaluating your operations in your HR departments. Lots of the things we saw here led us in that direction primarily because we found some that silo and said, well, what are they saying about that and how are they doing things? We then also work with you to optimize your workflow, develop a plan to optimize your workflow, and look for those redundancies. How can we get rid of those faster and make sure that your objectives are being met? Make sure that these processes are aligned. And then we prioritize those recommendations, looking at what you could do to get the quickest gain with the largest impact. And just want to bring you back to what these savings and what these opportunities look like on paper is $634 to $1 million in cost savings with these processes, as well as the labor efficiencies. I will say that these cost savings don't take into account any kind of labor savings, that if you implement some of those would be on top of that. So.
A question for you. You've worked with Huntsville. And this was just one department, that was finance. You didn't get to HR or operations or the rest of our departments. What kinds of money have you saved in Huntsville?
At Huntsville, we found a total of our initial work there was $7 million. And that was just from similar process improvements, similar opportunities for revenue increasing. We looked at their E-rate, which is a process that didn't come out of finance here either, and found some opportunities in applying for more dollars there. So.
And what would you estimate for us? Just an estimation.
Yeah. Well, again, we haven't gone very far. We've gone into your finance. But given the number that we found at Huntsville and your size and the opportunities that we have seen here, we'd safely say 10 to 12 million would be like what we'd like to see and what we'd like to find and feel we could. So.
You've identified those opportunities that we have for possible savings.
Yes, sir.
And I see that you're going to come back with us in terms of a plan. Will you also work with the individuals in those departments to implement those plans that we are now hearing about?
Yes, sir. We would be happy to do that. And we have the expertise on our team that's implemented many of these projects already.
The training and all that is what you're
Yes. Yes. And what we like to do too, just to clarify, is we like to teach these things and how you make these improvements, not just do them for you, so that you can continue to improve and continue to evaluate things like this yourself ongoing. We believe one of the lean concepts that is very important is continuous improvement. So it doesn't stop with one improvement.
So how long do you think it would take after you do the total evaluation? How long do you think it would take to train and implement?
Well, I would say that some of these programs are things that require a little bit more evaluation, so it gives you a fair amount of time to do your complete analysis. I mean, some of these could be done in 6 months from now. It's very reasonable to think that 6 months of implementation would be sufficient.
And then within that by the time that 6 months then, in terms of everything being put in place, then we can see those benefits and those cost savings at that point in time, because that would be in place.
Many of those, yes.
Could we get some kind of, at that point, as opposed to right now, that cost that you've identified, and then in the end, would you come back and let us know what we have saved in terms of?
Absolutely. We love to look at the return on the investment.
Yeah. I think, Mr. Porterfield, this is kind of the analysis you've been asked for.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And I think that it really allows us to look at our district in terms of the workflow and processes that we have in place. And it gives us those monies that we can use in different ways. Some of the software that you talked about, we already have in place, we just aren't fully utilizing.
Yes, ma'am.
And this gives us a chance to do that, not to mention the patients that we're using. So I think that this, hopefully the board sees this as a way that we can improve in many, many areas. And this is just one department.
That's right.
We have many departments that we can work on improving. And it doesn't lose, you don't lose functionality, but you do potentially expedite the process in terms of how you're doing things.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we're gonna go from finance and then we're gonna go to HR and
HR and operations, and keep in mind the reason I'm holding on my administrative hiring is that I also wanted them to look at that administrative organizational structure.
okay.
On the curriculum side of the house, this is more the operational side of the house. That's another whole side. It's just that this side is going to give us a little bit more financial savings. The other one is personnel resources. Not that you won't save over there too, but this allows you to really look at your, in my opinion, your district in a very objective way. In terms of what other districts are doing that are comparable size.
Right.
And I really like the comparisons between, Huntsville and other school districts and where they are, Jefferson County, or those things. And there was a slide.
There
that you
is.
had.
Actually, I'm going to go to that.
There's
It
one
is
more
in the
slide
back.
that
Yeah,
you
there's a
compare
slide
us
in the back.
that I think is a good one to use too.
Here, but my question to you, Barbara, is, to me, right now, I mean, operations is very important, and I mean, if there are ways that we can save money, by all means do it, but I'm concerned that we have so many key positions that are just sitting there. I would think, why wouldn't we want them to get on that too?
We're doing both of those, miss. No, we're doing both.
Okay.
It's just that I asked for this, no, we're doing both. That's why we brought down another team. We're doing both.
Yeah, we'll be doing that at the same time we're doing the other. Yeah.
Okay.
They're not prioritized above, it's together. It's
That's
both.
together.
There's
As
lots
a
of-
system, you really, but there's just some over here that you really, I thought would make sense given what we're looking at. So that's why you have this, but we're doing both.
Okay.
One of the key things we have to remember is teaching and curriculum is about our students achieving.
Right.
And so that's got to be done at the same time, and
I
we're also
agree.
trying to see.
That's what my concern was, because I didn't realize that we were doing it concurrently, which I'm glad that we are.
Do any board members have any other questions in reference to any fraud presentation?
I have a question on, what kind of time frame are you looking at to complete the operations and human resources assessments?
We have given some tentative dates that are the first week of May, the end of April, first week of May, very soon.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We are moving right along.
Very fast.
Because, and your point was well taken, Ms. I'm glad you brought that up, because we are looking at those concurrently. We're not doing one before the other. It's just that this one made more sense in terms of where we were. But we are looking at those, and I hope the board really appreciates what Lean Frog is doing for us, because I think it's very informative in terms of where we are as a district and our workflow, and it gives us a good direction to follow in terms of things that we can correct and improve on in the future. So, and it will also help us work on some of those areas that we need to be worked on. So this is a good thing.
Well, in comparison, using leapfrog as compared to what we are dealing or using now, would this be a better means of financial control?
I'm sorry.
Compared to what we are using now, to leapfrog.
You're talking about our
Would leapfrog
processes?
would be a better means of financial control with respect to your spending and accounting for dollars spent.
Dollars spent
Yeah.
to us.
Not to you all, for
This
all of
right
what
here.
we're dealing with.
Here's
Yeah,
on this one.
savings. Yeah. Yeah, I'm talking about savings. Still within that, but, well, I'm speaking of financial control.
Okay.
Would this be a better means of, rather than all the paperwork?
Yes,
we're saying,
okay.
would this be a better means of financial control?
I got you, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I got you, you're talking about all the, if we implemented all
absolutely.
of these programs that we
Yeah.
have said, will you have more control or less control
Right,
than you have today?
on the finances.
Yes, sir.
Money.
Yes, absolutely. You've got a lot of paper processes
Yeah.
that you can't quantify how they're being, you can't quantify how they're being done because you don't have them in a system.
Right.
When you have them in a system, you're able to pull up that
Absolutely.
information and that
So
data.
that's a better means than a financial
More control.
There you go. Yes, sir. And again, this slide, if y'all are interested, again, it was just a comparison of your peer group. And again, you see you're kind of about middle of the road today. So we looked at a best in class, and Jefferson County was your best in class. And when ironically, I guess, because we look at the efficiencies that you can gain, they've implemented a lot of the things we're talking about already. So you have that potential to move to that same status.
That's great. We want to be best.
I know, right?
Well, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.